this was also the week where we marked 3 years since the massive Black Lives Matter uprising on the back of the police murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, which ignited this movement. And I feel like every Memorial Day, yes, you see the like drunk college students in like some floaty place. There's always like it's like Florida. They're all just like drinking White Claws in on a floaty. Like that's like Memorial Day. But then since 2020, I think of George Floyd. I think of where we all were. I think of being under lockdown. I think of, here in LA, what that looked like, obviously around the country, what that looked like. And it's nice that like groups like Movement for Black Lives sends out, reminders of who George Floyd was. Yeah. Not only the man that sparked this movement, but, and I'm quoting from them, a kind man who would walk female coworkers to their cars to ensure their safety. He loved Latin music, but would dance terribly to make others laugh. Now, I love that part specifically because like I do that on purpose as well. Like I just lean into being a mediocre dancer and I'm like, I'm just going to go with this. Yeah. His death, his murder also, like for the first time, we saw police officers have been sentenced to jail. Chauvin was sentenced to 22 and a half years, then 21 more years for violating Floyd's civil rights, which is fascinating in this country that it's like, that's almost the same amount of time for murdering him. Right. But violating your civil rights, like doubled the sentence. Then all the other officers involved, Kung was sentenced to 3 years, Tao 3.5 for violating Floyd's rights. Officer Lane was sentenced to 2 years in prison. So there's been some accountability, but it's mostly contained, right? It's like, how can we just make sure there's just we make an example about this and then we learn fucking nothing from it. So, police murders obviously have continued. Disproportionately, Black people are targeted. But there's also not a lot been done on the executive level. So I will get into that in a second, but I just want to show you like where things stand now, public opinion wise. 80% of Americans want police officers to face legal action for abuse of power, unnecessary harm. 78% support community-based alternatives to policing. That's huge. Yeah. That's a 2022 Gallup poll.
Right.
And such as violence intervention programs. Huge.
Yeah. And I feel like that is not the core, like the just core, like mainstream media takeaway from the protests of 2020 was that like the phrase defund the police was a thorn in the side of like serious politicians and it was a disaster. Nobody will ever do that. Nobody will ever want that. Police have like remained kind of petulant since then. And then they did this thing where they blamed a rise in crime during the shutdown on that movement somehow. And it wasn't like there's no statistics to back that up. And in fact, the statistics suggest that one of the big causes of the rise in crime was that all those programs that aren't police, but are like, social programs to keep kids occupied and, safe and, violence mitigation programs and things like that all went away or were shut down during the pandemic. And like, so that's the thing that actually has an impact and had an impact. But again, it just feels like that was not the story that got through to us.
No, no, absolutely not. And I think, but it is heartening that like, at least there's this stat of people want to move money away from into, let's not trigger anyone by saying away, right? Because in the same Gallup poll, only 35% of Americans want to reduce the budget of police departments to fund social programs instead. Now, I would argue 35%, not bad. That's not as bad as like, I would even say Democrats or mainstream news outlets or anyone paints it as being. 78% saying we need alternatives and 35% saying we should defund. We get the money from the police.
Right.
We're sort of saying the same thing, but you're right. Like the takeaway now that we're being like handcuffed, like in terms of the budget, in terms of like all the debt ceiling bullshit is only going to mean more like insecurity for folks, only going to maybe lead to more petty crime. The crime of allegedly trying to use a fake $20 bill. Remember,
Sure.
as George Floyd allegedly did.
Yeah, the shoplifting explosion was like a major media panic that turned out to not really be supported.
Exactly, exactly. Hey, you know what's going to lead to shoplifting? When you brutalize protesters and you make them get angry in front of a Walgreens. You know what I'm saying? There might be a little bit of looting. Obviously, over here it was like, let's get the Louis Vuitton, which I really don't care. I'm not mad at. But this year, in fact, this just broke that cities are going to pay $80 million to those who were injured in the 2020 racial justice protests. At least 19 cities will pay settlements to protesters who sustained injuries as a result of law enforcement action. Justin Hansford, a professor at Howard University School of Law and executive director of the Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center, called the total number of settlements unprecedented. I've never seen a wave of settlements for police brutality like this in American history. So on the one hand, you have Greg Abbott defending the dude who shot a Black Lives Matter demonstrator in Texas. Right. But on the other hand, quietly, there are massive payouts being made because folks were brutalized in the wake of George Floyd's murder. Yeah.
And I mean, part like that absolutely should be happening. That, like, when you look into the history of the LAPD, that does seem to be their entire strategy, is like just be brutal and, unjust in ways that where you're not even trying to hide that you're doing that, and then just pay massive payouts with taxpayer money. So absolutely, it's like we're paying for it.
Like that doesn't even come out of the police budget. Like at least you'd be like, look, you can do the pew pews and the bang bangs, right? But then you're gonna lose a police cruiser and you're gonna have to ride with Jack,
right?
And we all know that he hot boxes the car after lunch.
Yeah, that's when you fart a bunch after lunch, right?
That's when you fart a bunch after.
Yeah, okay.
But also, or you just smoke a lot of weed, whichever.
Oh, I've never heard of that. Or both. But
yeah, I never heard of that. I love how I don't think I've ever hot boxed. There's no need to hotbox anything. I was like, no, you could just inhale the smoke into your lungs.
Yeah. No, I'm
high enough.
Secondhand smoke mixed with the
air freshener
droplets of the other people that I'm in the car with. Yeah, it is good for dramatic effect.
That's true. It's fun to say.
You feel like you're getting high when you're in a car that is full of smoke. You're like, man, this is the most pot smokingest I've ever been in my life. Yeah.
Okay, so lastly, I think the thing that always astounds me, and it's the thing we covered for News Broke, it's the thing we've talked about a lot on all the different shows I'm on, is that the BLM movement helped Biden win. For as little as he's done, it helped Biden win because it put into stark sort of view what 4 more years of Trump would be. I mean, remember how dark August was, 2020? You've got Trump basically playing the Nixon card. They've run amok with our cities, and then obviously COVID deaths and the election. It's just things got so dark, and people would have been completely demobilized had it not been for this massive uprising. And it absolutely channeled into Biden winning, and it absolutely was driven by young people. And there's nothing that's been delivered. The only thing that has been done is Biden last year in 2022 signed this executive order for federal law enforcement agencies that bans the use of chokeholds, restricts no-knock warrants, and requires anti-bias trainings and body-worn cameras, because we've never seen anything awful go down on a body-worn camera. It only goes so far because it does not apply to state and local police. So in this case, wouldn't have really done anything for George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, I believe, for that matter. But so this is I don't know, Jack, how much you've been following some of Biden's the executive actions he's taken, whether it's around this, whether it's around the win around domestic work and home care. It's all strong suggestions to federal agencies to find money to try and allocate
Right.
to the beginning of the programmatic implementation.
Well, you have to be careful,
something.
Francesca. You just got to be very careful when you're making these sorts of changes only.
Yeah. It's just very, first of all, it's only federal and it's only like strong suggestions.
Sure.
Like, we hope you look into affordable childcare.
Yeah.
Could you do that? And then, is there money in this program? Nah, we made shirts.
Yeah. Presumably a lot of promises to have meetings later on about that subject.
Right, right,
Yeah.
exactly. There will be a lot of, Zooms. Again, back to
Right.
we should study the issue. But one thing, lastly on this, California is moving ahead because we didn't talk about this on the show, but maybe y'all did on the Zeitgeist. The California Reparations Task Force voted in a series of proposals for reparations for Black Americans. One of the areas includes mass incarceration, over policing. There's also housing discrimination. They recommended providing $115,000 per person in 2020, or $2,352 for each year of residency in the state since 1971, which was the first year the War on Drugs, a program that specifically targeted Black Americans. The first year that was implemented.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Damn. I mean,
not to make it all about this state, but like, I did not expect this. I absolutely would not have expected a task force to find this.
Not to make it all about the state, but what are you other states doing? Are you not trying hard enough? We're killing it out here.
Yes, Elon lives here, but look, we have a recommendation that probably won't be implemented.
Yeah, that's the thing is like, I mean, as we saw earlier with the celebration over the Uber law passing and then like mere days later it getting vetoed, it's like, I also feel like there is a strategy of just, tying good ideas up in like, sure, yeah, that's a big win for us. And then like it gets bogged down in all sorts of red tape and bureaucracy and it's a mess.
You'll have to, I mean, I think I've said this before, but like it only applies if you have 3 children under the age of 5 and like drive a Nissan Altima and like that is also champagne colored,
Yes.
Like
that's otherwise
specific. Yeah. And missing the undercarriage because it's too low to the ground, like my car, There's just, I'm bringing it all back. There's going to be caveats. But yeah. So anyway, it's when our vote is asked for yet again. I think young people, look, I will echo once again my mentor Max Albon, who's been on this show, who says all it takes is for the right to win one more time. All they have to do is win again, one more, whether it's Trump, whether it's DeSantis, not this year, but hell, in 8 and 4 and 4. So I'm not going to say don't hold your nose and vote, but I am very curious as to what pitch Biden is going to be making to the folks who've been arguing for racial justice, justice in policing, police reform on a real level since this uprising. What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Do it.